All right, welcome everyone. My name is Casey Fiesler. I am faculty at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and I had the great privilege of being the awards chair for CSCW this year. So if you have not checked out the awards and recognitions page on the CSCW website, make sure that you do that because you can find out about best papers and honorable mentions and outstanding posters and recognitions for contributions to diversity and inclusion. So that was quite a huge and rewarding task to wrangle all of that from our current new CSCW papers this year. But also, part of my task was to wrangle the Lasting Impact Award. Let me share my screen here for just a moment. So if you were not aware before this, CSCW has a Lasting Impact Award. This was instituted not too long ago, and this is an annual award that recognizes a CSCW paper that is at least 10 years old and that has had a significant impact on the field of CSCW. So this is a list of the past winners of this award. You will probably recognize many papers that are listed here. And every year at the conference, we have a session like this one where we reflect on this important work of CSCW past. The way that the process for this award works is that there is a committee of senior scholars in the CSCW community, including past winners of this award. So this year, I was fortunate enough to have these folks on the left helping with this process: Cecilia Aragon, Amy Bruckman, Carrie Karahalios, Michael Muller, Bonnie Nardi, Paul Resnick, and Naomi Yamashita. I think I saw at least a couple of them in the audience earlier. So thank you again for this very rewarding and helpful process. This year, because I was also wrangling the other awards for CSCW, I had this excellent awards committee of mostly more junior researchers in the CSCW community, a lot of junior faculty here. And so I also got input from them, from our short list of nominees on what they saw as the papers that were impactful. And this is based on nominations from the community every year. So make sure that if you have your own ideas of what papers should show up on that list in the future, that you keep those in mind. I am the awards chair for 2021 as well, along with Shayan Guha. And so look out for something from us next summer when we'll be taking nominations for this award again. But without further ado, I am very happy to announce that the winner of this year's award is this striking 2004 paper, Territoriality and Cooperative Tabletop Workspaces. If you happen to be at the panel before this one, the joint CSCW WIST panel on the last 40 years of CSCW and WIST research, which was fascinating, by the way. I'm assuming that it's probably on YouTube by now. You should definitely watch it. Mary Morris actually talked about this paper when they were going through the early 2000s. So for this session, we have with us the authors of this paper, Stacey Scott, Sheelagh Carpendale, and Kori Inkpen, and you can hopefully see them alongside me right now. We also have Jim Wallace as a discussant who's going to talk about how he sees the impact of this paper on the field. But first, because we're so usefully able to avoid internet issues, etc., Dr. Scott has done a video to introduce the story of this paper. So we're going to start with that. We're then going to hear from Jim, and then we are going to have a discussion with the authors. So let me stop sharing my screen. And so if we could play the video now, that would be excellent. And then we will come back live.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stacey Scott, and on behalf of my co-authors, Kori Inkpen and Sheelagh Carpendale, I want to express our extreme honor to be awarded from CSCW 2020. This is an extreme honor for us, and it's extremely personally gratifying for me. This paper was a core part of my PhD, and Kori and Sheelagh were my co-supervisors. So this paper explored groups collaborating at traditional tabletop workspaces. So we looked at different groups doing different kinds of tasks on different sizes and shapes of tables, and really tried to understand how those groups were using the space on the table to help us think about what the design of interfaces for digital tabletop workspaces should look like. What we found in the paper was that people were very territorial in their use of a shared workspace. And that territoriality actually provided them a lot of benefits to coordinating their work, to sharing the space, overall to interacting within a shared workspace and the constraints that that provides or that puts on the group. And the knowledge we gained from the study around territoriality and territorial behavior and social norms in general and the benefits they can provide when people are working together in a shared space has informed a lot of the CSCW systems that I've built in my career. And I'm still using that knowledge today. It's been extremely foundational for how to think about designing systems that really support and not hinder people's social interactions. The main message that I hope that you'll take away today is that understanding social norms like territoriality can help CSCW designers build flexible, adaptable systems that support a multitude of individual and group behaviors as needed. So today I'm going to talk about what is territoriality and why it matters, and also how can we leverage territoriality and other social norms when we design CSCW systems. We'll start with the first one. So probably most people in the audience think about territoriality at a larger scale than a shared tabletop. The concept is really broad. It applies to geographical and geopolitical segregation of spaces where countries have borders. Within countries, there's regional, state, or provincial borders. On a block, there's houses. Those houses might have fences around them to very clearly demarcate what's your space and what's someone else's space. Gangs can often create territories within neighborhoods or blocks in a city. Even on a bus, somebody may claim their territory and say, I don't want anyone sitting beside me, simply by putting a bag next to them on the seat. That's a territorial marker. That's a signal to others that that place is owned, at least temporarily by somebody. In a shared workspace like the table we see in the library here, there's two people working on a large table. Each have established their own territory on that table. They're working independently, but they have their stuff laid around them. If one of them got up and walked away, went to the bathroom, somebody else coming to that table would clearly understand that that space that has been vacated is still someone's territory. Their stuff, their territorial markers are there, claiming at least temporary ownership of that space. So within our paper, when we watched people using different types of materials on different types of tables and doing different activities, what we found very consistently was when people arrived at the table to share it, it was sort of initially a group territory, and all the resources are available for sharing. As you start working and as you sit down at the table or stand at the table, your personal space, the kind of bubble that exists around you that people stay out of, and that's another social norm people use, that extends onto the table. So what we saw was people developing personal territories. Those territories were mutually understood to be reserved for the person's use that was directly seated near it. And all of our participants respected each other's territory. If somebody went to take a resource or wanted a resource in someone else's personal territory, they would typically either implicitly or explicitly ask permission from that person to take that resource. And we also saw use of storage territories, or development of storage territories. This was more of a practical identification of territories. The ownership of those storage territories really depended on where that storage territory lived. If it lived in a personal territory, those resources or items in the storage territory, such as resources that might be used later or work that was finished and set aside, they would still belong to the person who owned the personal territory. If the storage territory was established in the group territory, then those resources would be available for anyone to use. The concept of territoriality that we saw in our study and that we studied more broadly really came down to a sense of ownership or a sense of responsibility for it. And all the definitions in social science around territoriality talk a lot about ownership. And those territories provide a space of your own, especially the personal territories, to work and to think and sometimes to protect your stuff. Sometimes there's a very physical boundary for protecting your stuff or doing those things, like a door, an office door or a bedroom door. But also, even when there isn't a physical boundary, the concept of a territory, this mutually understood space, there's a psychological boundary. People understand that an area that has been reserved, whether it's because someone has laid out their stuff on a library table, and that area now is reserved for them, or whether you're just working with somebody in a shared space and you can see that they're near that space and they're working in that space, it's understood that that space is there for working. It helps those personal territories also help people to disengage from the group activity if someone needs to think or work, not quite privately, but just sort of disengaged from the group. So territories provide a space for that. We also saw that territories were very flexible. So the size and shape of territories can shrink and grow depending on the task being done and the size of the materials, depending on the size and the shape of the table and the space that is being shared. But we also saw that throughout the task, whatever activity groups were doing, that territories could change as well. So if two people were working together on a joint task and they were working independently, maybe they were each doing part of the task. They had done the divide and conquer strategy, they would work. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stacey Scott, and on behalf of my co-authors, Kori Inkpen and Sheelagh Carpendale, I want to express our extreme honor to be awarded the Lasting Impact Award from CSCW 2020. This is an extreme honor for us, and it's extremely personally gratifying for me. This paper was a core part of my PhD, and Kori and Sheelagh were my co-supervisors. So this paper explored groups collaborating at traditional tabletop workspaces.
Drew, I think there's an issue with the video still. It actually just started over.
Yeah, Gabe is looking at it right now.
Okay.
But there appears to be some kind of an encoding error or something with the video. It's not playing through the video portion. We're only hearing the audio portion. And attempts to cue it have not worked so far. So he's looking into the issue, but I, at this moment, do not yet have a solution.
Okay. Stacey, would you prefer to maybe finish up the discussion live yourself, or would you prefer that we play the audio of the rest of the video?
Sorry, just getting unmuted. So yeah, this is really unfortunate. I apologize to everybody. The whole point of making this video was because I was having internet problems yesterday and I really didn't want it to go crap out during the session. So this is even worse, I think. So I could try to show my slides. Let me queue them up. I had them on a different computer. Let me just try. And I'll just start from kind of the midpoint on. You've heard most of the video, but really what I'd like you to see is some of the latter work where there's actually, hopefully there's videos that you can see. So let me just see if I can get that up. And yeah, I apologize for the delay and the technical issues. The new normal, I guess. And it might actually be the case that I don't have it on this computer, which is, of course, is always the way. So I think maybe I will just talk about it without the slides, and I really apologize for that. And for all of you who have access to it, I have actually posted the whole presentation with the moving slides on YouTube, so you can watch it and see the videos there. So again, I apologize, but the main takeaway from this paper for me and my career was really that we saw that the concept of territoriality as a social construct. So it was something that people socially create to create rules around behavior, interactions, interpersonal interactions. And the fact that they're socially created means they're very flexible. They're not hard and fast rules. And so what we learned taking away from the research into territoriality and watching people create spaces that they protect and sort of mutually understand that those areas are for others, reserved for others' uses, is that we can also change what those territories look like. So as a social construct, sometimes we have a large personal territory which extends on the table in front of us. But as the task needs, or as the stage of the collaboration needs, we can contract or shrink that personal territory or grow that personal territory very easily with traditional tools such as paper media. And the reality was when this paper was written in 2004, at the time, computer interfaces or computers were very rigid. And so we really took this as inspiration to figure out how to create interfaces that are a lot more flexible. And so what you'll see if you watch the video on YouTube is some of the projects that we've done over the years, and including projects that we're still doing in my lab, looking at creating more flexibility in the interface to support both individual interactions, but also interactions between group members. So how can group members, how can the interface itself support group members acting differently at different stages of their collaborative tasks? And one of the other things we've taken away is the fact that people really want and need personal territories, or sometimes even private territories or spaces in their workspaces. So we've done a lot of work recently on multi-display systems where there's a large shared group territory, either as a table or a wall. And they also have a private territory or space, or personal territory or space in the form of maybe a mobile tablet. But the nice thing about flexible or using devices that are mobile is that people can also be flexible with those. So sometimes I want to use a tablet when I'm in a group context for personal work or for independent work while I'm in the group context. I can do that. I have my own space to do that, and no one's sort of interfering with my interactions, but I can still show that tablet to somebody else, maybe line it up with my collaborators' tablets, so I can use those devices in a flexible way. So really the big takeaways from this work were the fact that territoriality provides a sense of, creates a space for people to work and helps them coordinate a shared workspace, but also is flexible, and these social norms are flexible. So it really inspired us to try to make interfaces that were as flexible as that. So that's the main takeaway. And again, I really apologize that the tech didn't work today. I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, everyone, apologies about that. Something I will definitely try to do is see if we can get a version of this session where we have the beginning and the rest of this panel as recorded with Stacey's video cut into the middle, so that people in the future, you know, aside from the 20 or 30 people who are here now, can see what it was originally supposed to be. Also, sorry for forgetting to mute my mic as I typed to people trying to figure out what the problem was. Yay, remote collaboration. So thank you, Stacey, for that introduction. I'm actually going to hand it over now to Jim Wallace from University of Waterloo, who can do the thing where we talk about why this paper is great so that the authors don't have to say that too much themselves. We can talk about them for a moment.
Great, thanks. I'm really happy to be here and to be able to talk about this paper and just celebrate the award with the authors. So as Stacey mentioned, this paper really introduced the theory of territoriality to HCI. And I think more than just introducing the theory, it really laid it out in a very clear, easy to use way. And so it very quickly became a touchstone paper for the community. Anytime we were thinking about space and collaboration around a shared display, this paper was your first stop. And I think that really shows both in the citations, so this is a very widely cited paper, but beyond that, the paper is also very consistently cited. And so I think it very much lives up to that name of a lasting impact. And even today, we're still seeing this work have a significant impact on new technologies as they're developed. And so I wanted to talk very briefly about some of the strengths. I have three major points of the paper and just some of the things that I think really contributed to that lasting impact. So the first one it really requires me to take you back to 2004. And it's a little bit hard to think back that far at this point, but technology was quite a bit different than especially what we take for granted today in terms of interactive touch technology. And as Casey mentioned, the CSCW and WIST joint session just before this did a really nice job of taking us back and looking at some of the technology from that era. But for those of us who maybe weren't around and publishing at that time, we didn't have 4K screens. We didn't have object or person tracking technology like Microsoft Connect. Touch screens themselves were quite new. So there was a Diamond Touch, which had these pads that you kind of had to sit on, and you could identify different people, but the touch technology was not just like picking up an iPad from the store today. And these tables were usually top projected, so they were really you'd go to every lab and they would have a very different version of what a tabletop might look like. They were very bespoke types of artifacts. And then there were all sorts of problems at the software level too, which I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time on, but it was not like you could just boot up an iOS device or anything. I mean, these were very, very custom pieces of hardware. And so I think one of the things that to me really struck me going back and looking at this paper was just how forward-looking it was. And if you look at the methods that they used, they were using observations of people with paper prototypes. And that was an incredibly smart strategy because it meant they weren't limited to any specific technology, which would have been a big limitation at the time. And as Stacey mentioned, it was really getting to the heart of these social constructs, these kinds of emergent behaviors, and understanding how people navigate social space. So I think it was just a brilliant way to approach this problem from the get-go, and it meant that we weren't limited to any one kind of technology. And we've seen that the concept of territoriality applied again and again and again ever since. So the other thing that was happening, and again, this was kind of nicely discussed at the session this morning. I didn't know that was going to happen, but it was a nice coincidence. Was this paper was also published at a really critical time in terms of that shifting computing landscape. So before 2004, kind of in the 90s, things were very, very desktop oriented. You know, there were PDAs around, there were tablet computers, but they looked fairly different than what we call a tablet today. And so I think there were a very small handful of papers that really helped us understand what the future of computing would look like. And this was one of them. Again, because it focused on how humans interact and human needs, rather than focusing on any one technology. And just again, to put you back in kind of the shoes of 2004, we hear about post-PC infrastructure. That wasn't really in the nomenclature at the time. There wasn't really this concept of what computing would look like beyond the desktop, but the HCI community was very actively exploring that idea. And so I think this paper, again, it provided a touchstone or an anchor or a way of us thinking about what might come next. And so we've seen this paper have a very deep influence in the area of interactive surfaces and spaces, spatial user interfaces, WIST. It really was one of these kind of anchor papers that people could come back to anytime they were looking at new technologies. And then in case it's not completely clear, the last thing I just wanted to mention was just the impact of this paper beyond the tabletop. So this paper is very clearly describing territoriality on tabletop computers, but we've seen applications of the work everywhere. Stacey was briefly talking about some of her work and the lab's work on multi-display environments. Territoriality has been applied there. We've seen it on wall displays, mobile devices. We're starting to see it applied in AR and VR. And so this paper just keeps going and going. And again, because it touches on this social construct idea and understanding how people use technology and want to collaborate together, I don't see it stopping anytime soon. I think it's going to be an impactful paper for the near future. And the distant future. And for those of us working in this remote environment in 2020, I think it also helps us understand why remote work just isn't quite living up to what we were used to last year even, in terms of these personal group and storage spaces are critically important, and a lot of the remote technology we're using doesn't actually support it as well. So I suspect we're going to see a lot of papers in the next year or two that maybe draw on some of that. So I just wanted to wrap up by congratulating the authors on their award. I think it's incredibly well deserved. This is a great paper. It's model research, and I'm really happy to see CSCW honoring it. And I'm also just very interested to see how it's going to be used going forward. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jim, for that. So in a moment, I'm going to give Kori and Sheelagh an opportunity to share their reflections as well. But I wanted to note, so if you have either questions for any of the authors, or if you have comments, perhaps in terms of how this work has influenced your own, or in anything to add to the kinds of reflections that Jim just gave, please put them in the Q&A. And also, if you would be interested in, speaking as if we were in a normal physical session, then just say in your question that you would like to say this yourself, in which case I will promote you to a panelist, and you can do that. Otherwise, I will pass on any questions or comments, but please feel free to to think of questions while we're doing this next part. And so the session, as a reminder, goes on for another 30 minutes. Okay, so Kori and Sheelagh, I wanted to make sure that I also gave you an opportunity to reflect on the process for this paper, how it might have influenced your work going forward, or your thoughts about how you've seen it used, etc. We'll go in author order. So Sheelagh, why don't we start with you?
Here, right. Okay. Well, I don't want to, I mean, I think that all of the things that Stacey and Jim have brought up are really true, that it's had, that I don't do any designing of interface or visualizations, which I'm often doing, without thinking about how we're using space and, you know, what kind of impact that will have on how people work together. So it's, for me personally, it's stayed as a lasting thing to think about. And I do notice that it's there in the discussions of all kinds of different places where I go, that people are thinking about, will their use of space support collaboration, or have they thought about it only from one person's perspective? And territoriality always comes up in those. But I think there is another part of this that has been a pretty profound influence to me. And that's, so this was, like both Stacey and Jim have said, looking deeply at theories about how humans work together, and thinking about what we were seeing in real life in the world in front of us, of people in just how they worked in, you know, unconstrained by technology, and thinking about how that might actually be important for us to think about when we're designing technology. And I have continued in that kind of vein myself. I have been super interested in, over and over again, looking at looking at how people are in the real world. In fact, actually, I think, I don't know if I have this. There's a quote. I don't know if any of you know Diane Arbus as a photographer, because she does this with photographs. She's looking at the real world, and her photographs are incredibly revealing. But she has this, I have this one little quote from her, which is from another qualitative researcher. So David Silverman had also picked this out as something particularly meaningful, but it has stayed with me. What Diane says is, I want to photograph the considerable ceremonies of our present, because we tend, while living here and now, to perceive only what is barren and random and formless about it. While we regret that the present is not like the past, and we despair of it ever becoming the future, its innumerable, inscrutable habits lie in wait for their meaning. And that's what I think, like, there is how we are behaving, we on the surface don't see, because we're just so used to it. And it takes doing the kind of intensive work that Stacey did in studying how these people were working on tables to start to actually see what is actually really there. And that working like that and working towards that has remained with me as like a super important way of approaching technology design.
Great, thank you. Kori?
Thanks, Casey. So I want to thank Jim for taking us back to what it was like to work in these systems back then. It was very reminiscent. These, as he mentioned, like these tables were incredibly complex to build. It is true that every lab you went to, somebody's was different. They were very custom. When we finally started having a few that were bottom projected, like that was amazing at the time. But again, in a similar vein to what the others have talked about, I think what was so foundational about this was at the time when we were all just focused on how we build these and how we build the interfaces on them and how we support the people. I think a lot of us were getting lost in the technology. Okay, so what's the right way so that we can have multiple people be able to interact? And we were very sort of thinking about just how to make it work. And the work in this paper and a lot of Stacey's PhD work sort of took a step back and was looking at how do we support the people? Let's understand how people naturally interact and build these interfaces in a more flexible, fluid way. Because I think at one point, like we were even talking about like having rigid territories for each person. Okay, here's my space and here's Stacey's space and Sheilagh's and Jim's. And then work like this shows us that sometimes that can be more detrimental to the interaction. And being able to support the fluidity with the way people interact in a very natural way is really important in these types of systems. Kudos go to Stacey though for this paper. She was a stellar PhD student and she really drove this work and gave it the care and the thoughtful detail that I think has made it as impactful as it has been. I also loved the visualizations that were in it as well, which I think Sheelagh also had a big hand in, because I think it helped bring some of these concepts to life. When you just look at the visualizations, it just makes it makes you understand sort of what was going on from the data that she was collecting. So over the years, I think the methodologies that we used in this paper, as well as some of the learnings from it, have definitely inspired the type of work that I've done, and it's been a great impact.
Great, thank you. We also have an audience member, Narhez Mayar, noted in the comments that this paper was instrumental for her PhD research on large interactive tabletops for collaborative visualizations. And I will say that I personally was also looking into how this paper has been cited over, particularly most recently, and it is such an interesting variety of technologies, as Jim noted, domains and technologies in which this has been cited, and also kind of all over the place. Particularly in the HCI community, pretty much every year this paper is cited in work at CSCW and CHI and DIS and WIST and group. And in the past couple of years, it's showed up in papers about interactions via gestures, and of course, various types of physical technological games and play, a lot of work with children, a paper about collaboration in escape rooms. So I've definitely noticed a really interesting variety of domains where this is taken up. As a reminder to everyone, please ask questions. I certainly have some, but it would be great to have questions from comments from any of you in the audience. But actually, I will start with a question kind of like that, and this can go to certainly Stacey or any of you, which is what is one of the most interesting ways that you have seen your work used, in the community in terms of citations, or just like, oh, look, this cool new technology is taking into account, this work that I did many years ago.
Yeah, I can take that one. Actually, at CSCW a few years ago, there was a paper I honestly can't remember the author's name, so I apologize for that. But it came out of the blue. It was a full VR system, and they created these photo portals within the space to create a personal territory. And they even talk about territoriality in that paper. And I was really surprised. I was just seeing this actually, it was an amazing paper. They had done a really, really, really fantastic virtual environment, a collaborative virtual environment. They spent a lot of time, very similar to, as Sheelagh said, thinking very carefully about sort of the nuances of interaction. And they had clearly read a lot of the different research, including this paper on social norms. And they tried very, very hard to put that into a virtual environment, which is really, really hard to do. And of course, their territories look really different than what we describe in this paper, but it was a really nice extrapolation of the idea. So they understood that people sometimes wanted a place or a space in a shared environment to do their own thing. And so these personal portals, I think they were called photo portals or picture portals, allowed them to kind of carve off their own work area or viewing area in the virtual space that was sort of separate than what everybody else was seeing. And I actually can't remember whether it was what the contents were visible to others or not, but I was really pleasantly surprised and kind of shocked to see that they had done this. And it was really a nice, as I said, extrapolation of the concept of creating a personal space for somebody in a completely different environment. And I hadn't seen that done before. So it was really, really nice.
So we just got in another piece of praise for this work in the comments. Lila Homayan says that this paper was helpful in their PhD research, which looks at designing flexible cross-device interaction techniques in multi-device environments. So I think we are. In fact, I actually wonder now if after this session, and maybe even more people becoming aware of this paper who weren't before, we'll see even more interesting applications of this work in the future. I will also add, because I realized that I neglected to properly introduce our panelists, our authors at the beginning of this session, that Stacey Scott is now an associate professor at the University of Guelph, where I hope I pronounced that correctly, where she's still doing work on collaboration across distances and other kinds of interaction design. And Sheelagh Carpendale is a full professor at Simon Fraser University, where she mostly does work on, I believe, information visualization and interaction design, and Kori Inkpen is now a senior principal researcher at Microsoft Research, where she does HCI work and especially more recently human AI collaboration. So one of the other questions that I had for you all is how this work or this line of work has shaped your own work moving forward, whether you are still working on some of these kinds of ideas, or how it potentially shaped the direction of your research. Anyone?
I can jump in first there. So for many years after this work, I was working in the area of video conferencing and telepresence, and I think some of this early work that stemmed from this paper and around this time with Stacey and Regan and many of the graduate students that we were working with. Again, I think it helped us recognize the importance of understanding how people interact in these environments. And then when I joined Microsoft Research and started working with some colleagues there, we came up with this methodology of doing some of this research, especially when we were dealing with technology that wasn't quite prime time yet. And I give some of this credit also to Gina Vanolia from Microsoft Research in terms of really also adopting this and pushing this. So a lot of the way that we approached that research was to build a rough prototype, whether it's a tabletop display or some even crazy piece of technology that's just basically we MacGyvered it. And then we would try it. We would try it in the real world with people. And the whole point of doing that was because building these systems can be really, really challenging. And we could spend years building something and build the wrong thing. And so we tried to just get enough of it together so that we could try it with real people in the real world with real tasks. And we were looking for two things. And so one was, what's most broken? And that's Gina's phrase, like what's most broken here? Like what do we need to fix first? And the second part is, what are the opportunities that this enables? And again, I think this style of research is really impactful for those things. It helps us focus our research questions on what's really important that we tackle to make this successful. And if it is successful, what are the opportunities? And does this have the potential to make an impact in the future? And I think that sort of methodology has underpinnings here. And again, the very sort of user-centered focus of it in a very technology-centric device.
Stacey or Sheelagh, do you have any thoughts on that? Yeah.
I think, well, I mean, maybe it's just because it's happening right now and because we've already had a few glitches this morning. I think, you know, the last, 8 months that we've been thrown into an online world pretty exclusively have really driven home how some parts of our technological world haven't thought about things like personal and public and private and group spaces. And because I, do a lot of work with data and we do a lot of trying to do human-centered design. And now we're faced that this is the only kind of contact we have. So we have been trying to literally reinvent what we can do with the current technologies and are constantly right now reminded about how there is a much broader part of our techie community who should be thinking about these issues and haven't yet. And hopefully, maybe even this panel will help them realize that that we need that kind of space, and that you need many different levels of awareness of each other. So yes, right now I am trying to figure out how to, replace the way that we've been working in a face-to-face contact with this digital context. And a lot of these things which are just normal in face-to-face are just not supported in our technology. And so, I mean, I know that 8 months is not long enough for new bits of technology to emerge, but I'm hoping that that this is going to push the directions and the capabilities that we have soon. So.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on what Sheelagh said, especially for those of us teaching in this environment, this new Zoom environment. There are so many hard constraints of these environments. They do not allow subtle interaction. Like one of the things that we saw over and over again in the territoriality research was how flexible different reconfigurations of people and how they use the space and how they disengage. So you can, if you're in a large group, you can easily create subgroups and maybe create a even subgroup territory to work in that. I know within my own class, I have a class of almost 100 breakout rooms in Zoom, not easy to implement or even like start up, like that kind of fluid interaction about how is the class doing. There's almost no feedback when you're teaching in these environments. But I think one of the challenges is right now we're in the state of a lot of the decisions made are around protection, so much protection, okay, protection from Zoom bombing and kind of cybersecurity things, that those kind of hard constraints, which I understand on one hand, but those are really causing a lot of decisions that shut down sort of fluid collaboration. And the fact that in my Zoom class, I can't be host and give my TAs like the same permissions that I have, which would be normal in a classroom, that they could walk around and easily go from breakout room to breakout room. Even in this context, the fact that I could not figure out how to tell you easily without being so disruptive that the slides weren't working is a real challenge. Normally I would just like get up so yeah, like I find there's so many barriers. So I really hope that, as Sheelagh said, like, we're 8 months into this. I am absolutely anticipating a whole bunch of CSCW studies coming out of this time where all of us are working in these real constrained environments. But it's clear that some of the knowledge from CSCW, like this paper, but like a lot of other really, really good papers, all the previous award-winning papers that you listed at the beginning, would all give insights into building better tools that these technologists are not reading, or maybe I know it's challenging to implement. So, I mean, kudos to them for making things work, but it's still, there's so, even in this remote environment, the concepts of territoriality and in general, like the social norms, being able to socially mitigate how we use these spaces is not there. They're not done very well. And even things that we had seen in previous tools that worked are not being consistently adopted. There's so much good knowledge from CSCW and even early kind of groupware tools that are out there that are just missing from these new tools. So it's really unfortunate. But I hope that we're learning, and I hope the whole community, beyond CSCW and HCI, but a whole tech community is going to learn from this, because there's a lot of people complaining that there needs to be changes.
So we actually have a question from the audience that I think is a nice follow-up to this. So Nargis asks, do you anticipate any new shift in territoriality based on our modern interactions with large interactive spaces? Does anyone want to take that?
Well, so one of the things I think why noticing that territoriality was having a role in interfaces is that territoriality, I mean, maybe humans are going to change, but territoriality has been happening for eons, not just hundreds of years, thousands of years. So I don't see humans not making use of a territory in different kinds of ways. I think that, in small social groups, I mean, I think that one of the striking things is how different humans' use of territorialities are in small social trusted groups, which is mostly what Stacey was studying, small social trusted groups. And then all of this kind of flexibility comes into play. Humans have not historically been so flexible in bigger institutions, in countries and things like that. But I don't see a shift in territoriality. What I think, I hope to see, like Stacey was just saying, is a shift in technology. I think, a realization, and I think that's actually one of the super important roles of CSCW as a community, is it's one of the communities that has managed to keep a foot fairly strongly planted in the tech, but thinks more deeply than many of our communities about social interaction between people, about what happens between people and how that needs to be thought about when you're designing tech. And, I think that what I would like to see a shift in is a shift in more generally. In fact, I heard this delightful term the other day, somebody talking about a design approach as techno-heroic. And I thought, oh yeah, it's kind of like although the yay, we can do it, so let's do it, right? And to be a bit more thoughtful about what's actually happening to the humans involved, and taking, I mean, we have all the words for it of being, human-centered in design, but in practice, if you haven't got, and I actually think like we need more of this type of work, of looking really deeply at what's the underlying reasoning, whatever, behind how people are behaving together, to see what of that kind of things we can bubble up to the surface. Because it was quite startling at the beginning when we first, in our lab, when we first had the first tabletop interfaces that paid, and I'd have to say at this point, just a little attention to territoriality. I mean, we knew we didn't have it perfect, but we had, and it was kind of like an explosion for the people who came to see it, that it just felt so much better that a little bit of attention was being paid for their needs as humans. So I think that there's two parts. I think there's just oodles of space to better understand our needs as humans, to even think about what has happened to our needs as humans in this Zoom world, right? And how are we compensating, and what could technology do to help us, and what kinds of spaces and what kinds of freedoms do we need? And I think that generally, we're so worried about security, and I actually do understand that, it's like, just like Stacey says, I do understand why that's a problem, but humans are actually not very rigid people in collaborations. Generally, people are flexible in all kinds of ways that usually often surprise them. And so how can we think about designing for human flexibility? And I think we need to, if we really want to support human creativity. And like what we're looking at right now is all the kinds of things that we've loved about face-to-face design, or about like design charrettes and human-centered design and body storming and all of those kinds of things. And we do a lot of construction and building, and how do we even at least approximate this in our digital world?
So I actually think that this line is a nice thing to wrap up on. So in the couple of minutes that we have left, Stacey, I'm wondering if you have any predictions about the future in the context of this space.
I've been reflecting a lot on obviously the virtual world. And it is actually because I'm primarily a face-to-face CSCW researcher, and that's Kori's fault. She got me into that, and I love it. But of course, we haven't been able to do that. So we had to think about, we've been in this, working in this, living this experience of online collaboration. And it's striking me how bad the tools are, given how long CSCW has been working on this in the HCI community. And there's been a lot of industry involvement in CSCW. Unlike some other conferences, we've had a lot of industry involvement, and somehow that is not making the impact. All the knowledge that is in the CSCW community and in the broader HCI community, it's not being adopted. And so I think there's going to be a huge call for action, because there's lots and lots of people complaining about these tools. And I think, up until now, for some companies and some organizations, remote was a really important part, but now everybody's relying on, these companies, Zoom and Skype and all these major video conferencing tools, they're making the world work right now. So I'm very, very thankful that they're here, but they're bad. They're really, really bad. And I do not find the interactions, it makes them possible, but it does not make them pleasant. And I used to really, really like seeing my collaborators, and I didn't used to be tired after meetings. They energized me. These kind of meetings don't tend to energize me in the same way. I mean, again, they make it possible, but I really, really hope that this time we're spending in the virtual world is really going to bring awareness to the fact that these tools are not sufficient for, as Sheelagh said, our human needs, and the flexibility that we need to make to get those needs really, really satisfied. And I think companies that emerge from this this kind of period of time that try to address those problems, and even as Sheelagh said, if they even try a little bit, I think they will be successful. And I hope they're successful. I mean, obviously there's financial implications when your institution's buying your tools, but I really, really hope that this is going to be a call to action for paying attention to social norms and giving that flexibility even within a remote environment.
Well, I, for one, am definitely looking forward to seeing those changes in the technologies around us, as well as the papers that are presented at CSCW 10 years from now that are still going to be citing this paper. So we are out of time for this session. I want to thank everyone who is in the audience for coming to celebrate this paper, to Jim for joining us, and of course to congratulate Stacey, Sheelagh, and Kori again for this award and for this contribution to the CSCW community. As a reminder, I will try to make sure that Stacey's video gets put up on the SIGCHI YouTube channel, and we will distribute that through the usual social media channels, but look out for that. And hopefully we'll get a version of this panel as well that will have that in there. So thank you again, and I hope that everyone enjoys the rest of CSCW as you reflect on remote collaboration. Thank you.
Thanks, Casey.
Thank you all.
Yes, thank you.
Casey, thanks, Jim. And yeah,
Thank you.
Congratulations, Stacey. This really
Thank you.
is, yes, your primary effort.
Thank
Yes.
you. Yeah, it was really important to me. I love CSCW as a conference. It really made my career. So thank you, Casey and Jim, and congratulations, Kori and Sheelagh too.
Okay. Have a great day.
And
Bye-bye.
I'll let you all know what happens with the video.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.